This is the era of new immigrants. So the guiding question is, who are these new immigrants? Well, we have to look at this chart here. This is starting in 1871, which is right around the end of Reconstruction. The green means old immigrants. That is, people from Ireland and England and Germany. They tended to be white. They tended to come from more affluent or wealthier families. They tended to be educated. And we have about 1.5 million coming in this 10-year period, 2 million and 2.5 million in this 10-year period until 1890. Then it kind of tails off. What we see is that right around 1900, we have what are referred to as new immigrants. These are Italians, Austrian, Hungarians, Russians. They tended to be poor. They tended to be less educated. They tended to be non-English speakers. And what happens is we have this huge influx from 1900 to 1910, almost 6 million immigrants, and those old immigrants and those nativists in the United States started to get scared, and we're going to see some efforts to clamp down on their immigration starting in about 1911. So just to put it in the notes, old immigrants tended to be Irish and German, some English, in other words, Western European, easily assimilated into society. They were white already, they just had to learn the ways of the United States. They did meet nativist resistance prior to the Civil War. This was a political cartoon showing the bigotry against Irish and Germans. The Irish, drunk whiskey drinkers, and the Germans, drunk beer drinkers. But that went away fairly quickly, especially after the Irish helped the Northern Union win the war. The new immigrants, well, they tended to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. More difficult to assimilate them because of their language, their skin color, their lack of education. They didn't have any practice with democracy. They tended to come from dictatorships or monarchies. The Jewish people are also included here. This is a very stereotypical cartoon criticizing the United States policy of allowing Jewish people to come to the country. So stereotypes and prejudice, they're going to be used by a group of people known as nativists to push anti-immigration policy. We'll talk about nativists in just a minute. Oh, right now. Nativists are what we refer to as native-born Americans. Not Native Americans, although you'll see them called that from time to time. These nativists tend to have immigration roots, but their families had been here for a few generations. These old immigrants tended to resent the new immigrants because there were just so many more of them. And because they're so obviously different. They looked different, they talked differently, they wore funny clothes, they ate strange food, and those new immigrants, well, they wanted to live together. They didn't want to immediately assimilate right into society. They were too poor to move beyond the port cities where they landed, so they tended to move into ethnic neighborhoods, which means they tended to move in areas peopled by others that looked like them. Immigrants looked for familiarity in a strange land, so they wanted churches that preached in their language, schools that taught their values, newspapers that ran stories in their language and about what they understood. They wanted businesses that reflected their local ethnicity. For example, the kosher delis in the Jewish territories, or olive oil presses in Little Italy and such. There was an effort to restrict immigration, but it doesn't really take hold until the 1920s. I show you this cartoon because immigration restriction used similar tactics to Jim Crow in the South. Things like literacy tests. You have to pass a literacy test to get in. Some even were trying to argue for a tax. If you wanted to immigrate to the country, you had to pay a tax, trying to keep those poor people out and keep those that were not English speakers out. So our modern issues over immigration have its roots all the way back in this era.